For instance, Jesus told a parable of five people who were given, five people who were given talents. And one went out and wasted it, and one went out and did better. And then in the other gospel, it says 3. Now, did Jesus tell the story differently? Quite possibly. Or did the person who heard it get the gist of what the parable meant, and it didn't matter if there were 5 talents, 3 talents, or the idea was the person with the 1 talent didn't do anything with it, and the person with the most talents did something with it in both parables. And so perhaps Jesus said it differently in each one, but perhaps the hearer wrote it down differently. How do you pronounce that word there in orange? Yeah, actually, I always thought it was pronounced pericope, but it's actually pronounced pericope. So there's another word you learned today. A pericope is an extract from a text, especially a passage from the Bible. So the idea is we have a Gospel of Matthew, and the story is told with a Jewish bent in that pericope. And the same story is told without a Jewish bent and in the idea of action, because it's all action in Mark, but it's the same story but geared towards a slightly different audience. And then you get to Luke. I mean, it would say in Matthew, and Jesus healed him, and in Luke it'd be like, well, this is exactly what was the matter with him medically. So the Gospels are different, but they are synonymous in many ways. So we have Luke saying, I'm writing based on what eyewitnesses saw. That's pretty good. I mean, one generation away. I mean, if you ask me what happened in East Bloomfield in 1974, I was an eyewitness. And I had a view of things. Somebody else might have had a different view of the same events. And so that's what we're kind of dealing with these different Gospels. Okay, here's an example of the 3 differences. And there are 100 examples. Matthew says, when he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying. Mark says, when he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, opposite the temple, more information, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately. Is it true the disciples came? Yes. But the closest, Mark points out that it's the closest of the disciples, those who were the closest to Jesus. Matthew doesn't say anything about sitting opposite the temple, which you would if you sat on the Mount of Olives and looked into Jerusalem. You would see the temple on the top of the hill. Luke says this, as for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another, all will be thrown down. So we see that the discussion was about the future of the temple. Matthew says just some disciples asked about it. Doesn't say anything about the conversation that was going on at the time. Mark points out that there are 3 or 4 disciples there. And Luke points out that they were discussing the destruction of the temple. Then, Matthew says, in verse 4, tell us when this will be, and what will be the sign of the coming of the age. There's 2 questions there. When and sign. What's the question? In order to get the idea of what Jesus is really saying in Matthew, you have to understand that Jesus had just told them the temple would be torn down. When was the temple torn down? In AD 70. But without Luke, we would not know that. He's added some information to give his reader a better understanding of what the eyewitnesses had said, because he talked to somebody else and they filled in the spot of the story that the others didn't mention. What will be the sign in the end of the age? Mark said it this way. The disciples said, "Tell us, when will this be? What will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" What were they talking about? The destruction of the temple. Luke, they asked him, "Teacher, when will this be? What will be the sign that this is about to take place?" In all three cases, Jesus said,